Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
I never know what's on her mind, and that's the exciting part because it could go anywhere. She is a Hayuka. Am I saying that right?
Heyoka.
Heyoka. Okay, that's a
Hey, it's like
storyteller.
Heyoka.
Hey, so I'm trying to reach the Yoka. Hey, Yoka. She's
Yo.
Yo. She's psychic medium, intuitive healer. She's a card reader. She's even a coach of sorts, and she's back with us. It is Janis Reed. Welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm so glad we get to talk today. I have a story to tell. I'm a storyteller. Someone asked me not too far back, too long ago, who I was before I was made Heyoka. And it was a good question. And I kind of knew the answer, but I was unable to give that answer at that time. I am what's called an extreme sensitive. I am constantly picking up information that I don't need, don't want, don't usually know what it's for. I enjoy working with individuals because then I can kind of zone in and pick out the individual out of all the noise and tell them about all the noise around them. It works as beneficial. I hear a lot of voices. I hear them from plants, animals, trees, rocks. There's a conversation going on in my head from everything all at once. Nobody else came up with that line. Periodically, I will be triggered by some sound or a smell, and a memory will flood back into me that causes me to basically shut down and be dumb for a moment because of the intensity of the unexpected recollection. And that happened to me not too long back. I was talking with a gentleman who asked me the question, what was I before I was made Heyoka? But there was a combination between the question, the name of the gentleman, and the timbre of his voice. I was at a loss. So now, having had some time to collect my wits about me, I'd like to answer your question. So if you're listening, this story is for you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith asked me what I was, who I was, what my life was like before I was made Heyoka. The timbre of his voice threw me. I had not heard that low rumble of a gentle alligator in a long time. I live now very comfortably about just surrounded by some of the best people I could ever have the good luck to have as neighbors. They're wonderful, but there are precious few people of deep color nearby for me to hear that sound very often. Not every man of color has the same timbre in his voice, that same sound, just like yellow people and red people and white. There's a different depth. In my family, there is an inherited rumble in certain throats of certain of my cousins and uncles. This man hit it. And I guess to start with is the question, when he asked who I was before I was made, I'm a literal person. So my brain shot backwards into what I was before I was made. And I got lost there because the timbre of his voice brought me to a very specific place that I have really only had one memory of for most of my life. It was a traumatic and very short, but incredibly loving existence. I was the offspring to a woman of color, and the man she loved was a deeper color than she was. They were friends. They grew up to be lovers. She became impregnated by her owner or someone in his command. In spite of it not being his child, he carried this woman and me and protected us as best that he could in a strange world, in a strange land where strange customs were the norm that he didn't even understand. Neither one of them did. They must have been newly enslaved rather than generationally, because the memories of Africa, those smells of the savannah, the smell of the scat from wild animals in Africa, I smell it as I talk about it.
Hmm.
None of this had been in my consciousness for years, but the sound of that deep African male voice threw me for a loop. And I kind of stuttered and I sort of laughed and directed the question otherwise to try to hide the fact that I was stupefied and dumbfounded and couldn't really answer that question at the time. The memory, you see, was they took me together into the swamps. And I was born in the marshes of Glen, in the saltwater part of the swamps. Swamps often are more black water or fresh water, but right on the edge of the coast. I died and I was born, and I didn't know that until I heard this Mr. Smith ask me. I was born a poor white child, and my parents loved me anyway. I was not going to be brought up in the big house. I was not going to be forced to learn the ways of white people simply because I was colored like that. And they took me into the swamps. It was a low boat. Mama held me in her arms, snuggled up to her bosom, cried the whole way, both of them.
Mm.
They pulled this flat bottom boat out into one of the lakes inside the swamps. Periodically, the swamp will open up and the sky comes in, and it's like a little lake. Sometimes there's ground there. And they found a place to put me. They wrapped me up, and by the time they got back to the plantation, there was no point in running from it. That was the only place they knew. The story was that Mama had miscarried and that she'd lost the baby, because they had agreed that yes, if they lost the baby, they could say they lost the baby, and that was the truth. They laid me out and kissed me and loved me and left me there in the swamps near Cypress Tree. They didn't realize what happened next because they were gone. Something of my history, my smell, my innocence, I'm still working on the rest of the story. Rather than be immediately eaten, I was cared for. Raccoons, foxes, they brought me little treats trying to get me to eat. I was a baby. I needed a mama. And the different mamas of the swamps tried to get me to eat, to keep me safe. And I lived for a while. I don't know how. So when Mama brought me to the swamps, I don't know how old I was. I don't know the age of the body I was in, but I was very, very small. I was less than a toddler. Somehow I survived long enough that at some point, an enormous white alligator and I became friends. The alligator, this mama gator, would bring little fishes, little birds, squirrels, and she also helped to raise me and fend for me. At some point, I think something must have happened that they realized, my mamas from the swamp realized that I was not going to live much longer. I was sick. I wasn't eating. I wasn't going to survive. Animals have a nature about themselves. A lot of a lot of creatures will eat their young if they're not going to survive anyway, or they'll throw them out of the nest and stop feeding them. In this case, it created a memory for that little child that was me then. Since I can remember in this life, the memory has been from back before I was born, as my parents learned to tell people, of me on the back of an enormous white alligator. She was like my mother, and I was laid out on my belly, just belly flopped right on top of the back of her head, near her neck. So I was up close, and I had my chin on the top of her head, and we glided, and this huge white plate-bodied dinosaur of an alligator, she was all white, and she gently swam me through the black waters deeper into the swamps on her back. There were animals on logs telling me to get off of her back. She would kill me. And I couldn't imagine my mother killing me. This was my mother. They just didn't know her. And I was happy to go with her. She was my last caretaker. There's a blank spot there. I don't know, but I believe I may have died while I was on her back. I remember going deeper into the water and not being bothered by not being able to breathe. So I think I came to as a deceased person while I was underwater in the swamps with my mother right there and all of my friends. I'm not afraid of death. It's never occurred to me to be afraid of death. I've always thought it was odd that other people would be afraid of death. But I didn't know why I felt like that. I have felt this way. But when Mr. Smith asked me that question, I heard the voice of a father I had who loved me to bits whisper into my ear that question, and the memories flooded in. So, Mr. Smith, I didn't really answer your question for you, but I hope I have now, because that was who I was, a part of who I was before I was made Heyoka. From that short existence, I was born into the marshes of Glen, not far from the Okefenokee swamps, where a lot of my family still lives. And while I look like this, if you look back in my family lineage in the census rolls, I am the offspring of Black people and Negro. The red skin of Native America, the touch of darkness, that when the gentlemen in my family get a deep dark tan, boy, they look really, really deep dark tan. Mama said when they were dating and first met in Brunswick, Georgia, Daddy would get so dark from working on the shrimp boats, and she was just white and white-haired because of her Germanic ancestry, that people often questioned if she was dating the right species. His daddy, what he said, was a man who just loved babies. He just loved people. My dad was born during the Depression, and he grew up near Baxley, Georgia, between there and Brunswick and Waycross, in that little triangle of swamp and marsh. I grew up among my people. I grew up to love everybody. I don't care what color you are. When Granddaddy was so poor, my grandfather was a sharecropper for reals. He was so poor that to sharecrop was the only way he could help feed his children. My grandmother was an epileptic, so you never knew what was going to happen on that day, each day from day to day, but she managed to raise 8 children of her own plus the one Granddaddy brought home spare. Granddaddy had gone into Baxley or somewhere to get feed and meal and groceries that he couldn't produce on the farm. And while he was there, there was this little dark-skinned boy sitting on the curb crying. Excuse me. Granddaddy asked him what he was doing. What are you doing crying down there sitting on a curb? Boy said he was hungry. So Granddaddy pulled out something to let him eat something. And they sat and talked for a while because little boy was only about 4 or 5 years old. That's about what he remembered he was about. He wasn't real sure how old he was. But he had hitchhiked and walked from South Carolina to South Georgia. He was about 5 by himself. He didn't like where he was living. And he didn't know where to go. He didn't know direction from direction. So he just, took the road. Granddaddy brought him home, throwed him in a bed with the middle kids and the big kids. They had 2 beds in the house. Granddaddy and Grandmama and any nursing child was in one bed, and the little kids, and all the other kids was in the other bed. There was 9 kids. The story is that they actually took turns snoring in the house because people learned to get along with each other and not be fighting. So I grew up literally with an Uncle Tom. Granddaddy let him pick his own last name. His name was Tom Ham. So if you're his relative, I'd love to give him in touch with you. He's passed away a long time ago, and I never got to know him. But the timbre of the sound of the voice, not just of my father, who loved my mother so much, he helped cover up her embarrassment. I experienced being cared for by wild creatures. And as it turns out, that wasn't the first time, but it's the only time I'm going to talk about today. We don't have the day to talk about. That sound, that comfortable, I can't even do it. I hadn't heard that particular tonal quality since I went to see the Buddhist monks who did the triple toning in their throats and sat there and couldn't move. I passed out there too. When I heard it, it matched up really a lot to the sound, that low grumble of the alligator. Since I was little, I have searched out every zoo that had a white alligator. I've been into the Okefenokes hoping I'd catch one, just a glimpse of one. I've seen them, but none of them clean and white, like I remembered. When I first asked my mom and dad this time about that alligator, I was not 2 years old yet. I had not been to the swamps. Nobody had told me about black boys hiding there. I didn't know any of that culture, but I knew details about the alligator and the swamps. It was a memory that I've always wanted to open up and find out more about it. I was gifted those memories from Mr. Smith. And thank you very much. Yes, there was trauma. Nobody wants to remember the times of being actually enslaved. They were so much awfuler than anybody could ever imagine. Because I remember. I remember what happened to my parents and theirs. And theirs. My memory goes way back. But as it leaves this current lifetime, it gets all fuzzy. It's like static because there's just so much stuff, too much input. I was not nearly as smooth and suave as I am today for years because I lived around people that made me crazy. They loved me dearly. Some of them even liked me, but they made me crazy because whatever trauma they felt, I felt. And I didn't know how to protect myself, to understand where that was coming from, because no one teaches people like me how to be like me. We teach ourselves. It generally stems from a great, great trauma.
How do you block that out?
You don't. By blocking it out, you block everything out. And then you live a terrible life because you never belong. You never understand how to belong.
You can't filter.
No, you incorporate. You accept, like I had to accept, that never in my life this time would I ever birth a full-blooded red-skinned person because I was wearing this skin. I was about 10 when I discovered that. I was so disappointed.
Well, can I share something personal with you?
Well, I just did. Your turn.
I just found out, and I'm talking in the last week, that I have a half sister and she's half black. Didn't even know.
No, no.
DNA on a website, ancestry.com, and it
And the
looks like
sister, not a cousin, but a sister. Huh? There was
uh,
a pole. I think there was a polecat in that hen house.
I don't have any answers. And my dad died when I was much younger, and her dad, as she learned, passed away when she was very young. Her mother never wanted to talk about it. And so we think we have the same dad, but we're still looking into that. But when you look at the numbers on the Ancestry site, the match numbers, I have a cousin there, so I know what the number is for a cousin. This is way higher. So,
Well, it's a good chance, a good chance. I was in high school, probably about ninth grade. We lived in Elba, Alabama. And my dad and myself and somebody else, it might have been my cousin, we drove up to Montgomery. It's spelled Montgomery, but if you live there, it's Montgomery. We drove up to Montgomery to the store. What was that called? They don't make it anymore. We went up to see the automobile department. Anyway, we were in this store, this shopping center, in the store, and we were in the waiting room outside of where they deliver big things out to your car. There were chairs there, and we had bought a big lawnmower or something we'd gone up to pick up, and we were waiting for them to bring it out of the storage and load it up in the back of the truck for us. We were sitting there when someone walked in from the outside, past us sitting there and into the rest of the store. And it was my uncle. It was my dad's brother. He didn't recognize us though, because he was not my uncle. He he was the color of ebony and the spitting image of my uncle. My father nearly lost his dentures. I almost chased after him. Alabama is not so far from southern Georgia. Things going on in times gone by, but he was a spitting image. It
wow.
was unbelievable. Not even Dad's other brothers resembled Uncle. Mike, I won't say his name. He'll come back and hate me. Haint. Haint is a word I was going to mention today too. People asking me who I was before I was made Heyoka. Well, from the story I've just told, basically, I was raised by haints. A haint is a spirit that used to be in a skin and walk the planet, but for some reason didn't quite make it all the way back to the beginning, and it got stuck here on the planet. There's a lot of haints in the swamps and the marshes. There's a lot of haints up here in the tops of the mountains like yesterday when the fog just filled up all the valleys. And in daylight, I had to really look to see the road in front of me because everything turned into a sea of fog. There's a lot of haints. I get along well with them. When I was born, I think I might have witnessed my birth. There was a long dark tunnel, and then there was lightness, and then there was sound, and then brightness, and then there was people squeezing on me. I may have remembered that, but my memories go back more than this life space. So when Mr. Smith asked, who was I before I became this? I didn't know from what point he wanted me to begin from. But because there's all this stuff between here and then, and my mind went backwards, it zipped through this space with the gators that I've never understood. because it's so strange, and it filled in the blanks. So I'm kind of tickled about it, and I wanted to share that story. When I work with other people, many times that's what happens. I mean, probably many times that's what happens. Somebody asks me to help them find an answer for a question or an issue now. I hear their voice. The vibration is like a smell. It wakes up all of my sensory perceptions, and it shoots backwards behind them where they came from. All of the forests they've walked through, all of the cesspools they've tried to wipe clean from their feet, all the times they went through the chlorine pool, cried themselves to sleep, laughed until they peed their pants. I go all the way through that, like I did for myself. And through that fog of what made them now, I find their answers for them. And I bring it forward to them in the form of a story, because stories are what live in the swamps. The Haints, that's what they tell. They have a story to tell. And so they stay there in the swamps, somewhere caught between hardcore physical reality and a dream. This is how I was raised. This is what I was before I became the different people that grew together and become who I was just before the lightning struck. I'm created of my experiences, just like everybody else. What sets me off sets me different.
Sets me apart.
What sets me off is that I remember, and I'm able to sniff out the memories for other people as well. That way, instead of being me telling them, I can just give them the story. And this picks up and kicks in a lot of times memories of their own. And instead of being told their answer, they kind of remember it. They come up with their own answer. And nobody told them. They came up with it on their own. They're empowered. People are stronger. They get a lot more response and help, better medicine, deeper, stronger medicine like this than if I was to just give them the answer.
Who doesn't love a story? As soon as we're able to understand and or read, what are we doing? We're amassed in stories, even bedtime story, all of that. We're out of time.
Well, I figured that would about take it up.
I have my experiences with the Haint. Like if I ask my kids, can you take out the garbage? They say, I ain't doing that. It's a different type of
Haint. Yeah, that's
different.
That's tricky. And if you're young enough and smart enough, you can pretend you have a lisp and they have to answer you.
Exactly. What method do we reach you?
Get hold of me. Send me an email. I really am old. I don't text because where I live, I'm surrounded by mountains and the signal won't get here, even though it's a quarter of a mile away. Send me an email to goddessjanis2@outlook.com. You know what? Give me a call. Find me on Facebook, Janis Reed. Just Janis Reed. I am in this life Janis A. Reed. Janis a Reed. I am a Reed. I will help you go from here to there safely. Lift you up.
In a story.
In a story. Get hold of me. I'll give you my phone number. And we'll talk about it. We'll set up an appointment. I enjoy helping people remember how strong they are from where they came. I help by letting people be who they really are, by opening up a place where a person can be who they really are and get a sense of how comfortable and strong that makes them feel, how much smarter and better looking they suddenly are by just being really who they are and authentic instead of walking around in life as a response to everybody else's questions.
Well, we always have questions. That is life. And you have answers in story. And Janis, thanks for sharing today. Interesting,
Y'all come
fascinating.
visit.
I'll be looking for that white gator.
She was so beautiful. Freaked my parents out.
I ain't gonna find one. I ain't gonna find one anytime soon.
Well, I've seen a couple of them, but they're beautiful. I could feel the texture of the snout. When my parents tried to get me to admit that I was seeing something on television, they showed me a picture of an alligator's snout and told me, now that's what it looked like. And it wasn't. No, I was on a gator. I was on or there's a crocodile and alligator. But they showed me the other one, and I assured them that that wasn't it. It was this one. Big, long, round, broad nose, beautiful, smooth, bumpy skin.
I didn't even know they existed, white ones, but they're going to cut us off. So,
well, it's a spirit gator.
All right, Janis. Well,
y'all have a great day. Thanks for listening. Bye.
You too. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.